time to do that August reading wrap up and talk a little bit about my September reading plans. Starting with 2-star reviews. In Bloom by Paul Tremblay. This is part of the Amazon Originals Creature Feature collection and has a much longer standalone review coming out shortly. That said, this is a 5-star idea with a 1-star execution. I cannot believe how damn boring Tremblay makes such a fascinating idea. This is the second thing I've read by Paul Tremblay, and this is the second time I've had this experience where it's a really cool idea or concept and just terrible execution. And you know, the first time I read something of his in an Amazon Originals collection, I gave him the benefit of the doubt and assumed that because it was like an older Amazon Originals collection, he didn't really understand what the benefit of being in one of those anthologies was. He kind of phoned in this short story for a paycheck and then just moved on to projects he actually cares about. But here he is in a second Amazon Originals collection, still either phoning it in, or maybe this just is what it is. I don't know. I think I was just really disappointed because a lot of people recommend his work to me, and I do think he has several ideas that really intrigue me. So it's sort of like this thing I want to be good, but I just cannot commit to a longer work of his if this is what the shorts are like. Next is I Got Abducted by Aliens and Now I'm in a Rom-Com by Kimberly Lemming. So this was the Weirdo Book Club pick for the month. And I was sort of excited for it because I do like alien romances, but regrettably this one is just not for me. It's way too silly, and silly in ways that I just don't find fun, and also found like very inconsistent in a storytelling manner. I can't give you guys details without there being spoilers, so I won't talk about it too much, but I found a lot of things to have like cognitive dissonance and inconsistency that was disruptive for me, and actually was ironically disruptive for me and my reading experience, the same way that our main protagonist is a naturalist and she's seeing all of these species that have been like revived, living in environments that are not ideal for them, trying to fend for themselves against creatures they would never have had to face off against, sometimes being like way too big or way too small, and her being like, how are you still alive? Why is this a thing? And that was me reading this book when certain things would come up. I guess this was also sort of holding a mirror up to me in that way too, because I found this character incredibly frustrating and annoying. And I was like, oh God, is that me when I review things? Maybe. Probably. Oh no. I like to think I do better than she was doing in the book, because I explained to y'all why I'm yelling or frustrated or upset, and a lot of times she's just like shouting at the creatures. We get an in-story explanation from her thoughts about why this is a big deal, but she's not explaining anything to all of the beings around her, which I think was a huge missed opportunity because the aliens around her have observed these creatures the whole time, and they could explain how they're living probably. They could like explain why this is working out for them, or the kind of struggles they've seen, what their nesting behaviors are like, all that kind of stuff, and that could give her more data. And actually, from a naturalist perspective, from someone who likes nature and all those biological elements, I think that would have been a great storytelling beat to hit. I would have liked a little bit more of that than I was getting. Also, I got the feeling that this author couldn't decide if she wanted a scientist character who was not like other girls because she likes to be outside and likes to rough it and likes to like explore and examine nature, or if she wanted a manic pixie dream girl. It felt like we smashed those two together, and there were some inconsistencies personality-wise when it comes to that. Also, I like Science Girl and I like Manic Pixie Dream Girl, but I did not like the smash cut of the two of them together. I found like the push and pull of those personality traits to be incredibly annoying and frustrating. The one little bit of grace I'll give this book is I do wonder if it was just bad timing when I read this in the month, because I had just finished reading first My Darling Dreadful Thing and then Carmilla, and tonally, serious level, quality of prose, characters, story building, what the goals of those stories are. Very different than this thing, and sort of like gets my brain in a different gear, and maybe I just wasn't in the right gear for a fun, silly, goofy, not that serious time. I think some of the issues that I'm expressing in this book are not things that the main target audience would care about. It's supposed to be a romance, so maybe as long as the relationship building and the steam is there, everyone's fine. For me, the relationships were too quick quick, like flip a switch. There is way too much like magical whatever in that. But I don't know, it did make me want to revisit Ice Planet Barbarians a little bit to see how that holds up and see if I'm giving this like a really fair shake. My one last complaint is it says, I was abducted by aliens and now I'm in a rom-com. I didn't find almost anything about this to fit the romantic comedy genre. There were a couple of moments where you could tell the story wasn't taking itself too seriously and wanted to give you like some funny, ludicrous imagery. Respect for that, because sometimes it was fine. Didn't strike me as a romantic comedy. The pacing was not right. The banter wasn't correct. The whole personality of characters and the scenario and the way the scenario was treated didn't fit a romantic comedy vibe. And guys, I know it's been a long time since we've made romantic comedies that kind of like fell off popularity and we haven't seen them in a hot minute, but I entreat you to go back and look at something like Night and Day, which is probably like a little bit of a thriller, a little bit romantic comedy. See how that exchange works out, and then compare it to this and tell me where the romantic comedy was in this. Moonlight, Roses and Murder by Anna-Violetta and Lorri Moulton. This is one of the books that I started in a try-a chapter and I decided to keep reading because I was sort of in the mood for like a paranormal mystery sort of story. I did DNF it at 39%, which means I wasn't able to count it for any of my readathons, which was a shame because it would have qualified for the Nevermore-a-thon on a couple of different levels. But reading this was like a trip. The writing isn't bad, but the way things flow from scene to scene and the way time worked was so wild. To get from one transition to another transition, we always had to be eating something, drinking something, making dinner, making lunch. The characters have a lot of dialogue and do a lot of exposition and conversation, which I don't necessarily mind. And I wanted answers to enough of these things that it was fine. This is how I was getting it. I was interested enough. It was cool. But we would be like getting the werewolf's backstory, for example, and eating breakfast. And then we'd get the vampire's backstory and we'd go from eating breakfast to making lunch and eating lunch. There's no way it took that long to tell the whole backstory. And there's no way our whole day is just making food, eating the food, cleaning the food up, and making more food to redo this cycle. And because they incorporate both food and alcoholic beverages while doing this, I was wondering why all the characters weren't just fat and drunk all the time. Plus they were doing this thing where they had this interesting woman character and all the men just had the hots for her automatically. I get that sometimes it's hard to portray mysterious woman character in a way that like translates to page, but I thought they were doing pretty well without making everybody into her all the time. You know, that aspect of the trope I find a little bit much, like way over the top. It's not that it was bad, but I had lukewarm interest at this 39% mark. I was noticing more like issues with the flow and pacing than I was like pulled in by the mystery of it. Also, I just didn't necessarily feel like they were stakes because this is like book one. I feel like these characters end up together and end up solving things. So I just don't think I care if everyone is going to be fine and they're all going to get to keep their successful bar or whatever. There were some interesting aspects about having a nightclub in Portland, Oregon, about the design of the bar, about like general back of the house kinds of things. I think in a different story that was more oriented on the service aspect, I would have liked it more. But obviously this is sort of like a murder mystery one, so I don't feel like we got enough. And everyone is also super wealthy, so it didn't feel like even in that part there'd have been a lot of tension or pull. Too many books in the world, and this one didn't grab me, so I thought it was time to move on to something else, which rolls me into 3-star reads. Ankle Snatcher by Grady Hendrix. This is also part of the creature feature and has a much longer review coming out. For me personally, I think it was closer to a 2 or a 1-star than a 3-star, but I am trying to put some of my personal gripes with it aside. The writing is more or less fine. It's a short enough story. There really is a moment of intense, gruesome horror within it that I think executes very well. It goes someplace else from there that it just ruins everything. I think other people's mileage is going to vary a lot on it, but if you are looking for like that quick, mindless little horror read, and if you like sort of a little bit of a campy creature, but we're talking about it in like a more horrible way, then this could be it for you. Brings me to Best of Luck by Mott. Again, this is part of the creature feature and has a much longer review in that upcoming video. I was really torn on this story. There were a lot of things I liked about it, and there were some messaging things in it that made me kind of iffy on whether or not I really liked it or it was just sort of like fine. But there is a cool gory moment. The descriptions are creepy. There's definitely a lot of tension from page 1. I think it does really well maintaining tension and keeping pacing throughout a short story, which is more or less probably what you can ask for in most shorts. Which rolls me into Big Bad, also part of the creature feature with a much longer review coming out probably next week. A thing this particular short story really made me realize is doing a lot of head hopping or perspective shifts in a short story is probably not ideal. It can be really hard to orient yourself and to figure out what's going on. And in this case, all the characters are unreliable narrators for one reason or another, and that made it very hard for me to figure out what the hell was going on, which rolls me into the Omegaverse by Roxy Collins. I started diving into Roxy Collins' backlist last month and reviewed some things there. Apparently I wasn't done with my Omegaverse Polly Why Choose Romp, and I went back to like the Billionaires in Heat series that I think I started over a year ago now. I think this one is book 3 in that series. It's a lot less problematic than book 2 in this series was, but also I didn't feel the relationship building was as strong here as book 2, which is why it's lower in my star tier than that one, which you'll see later. Overall, I would say like this Billionaires in Heat series is Roxy Collins sort of playing with what alpha omega dynamic should be, what pack dynamic should be, what the rules of it could or could not be. And I find it really interesting to see this origins based off of like House Omega and the Alpha Club, which are her more recent series that I love. Like here I can see the beginning makings of that has not entirely been hammered out, and it sort of feels like we're making it up as we go along and sort of figuring that out as we continue. This one was fine, if a little bit forgettable. I think if you like that Why Choose Omegaverse, like pack dynamics kind of story, this one's a lot of fun. One thing I do like about Roxy Collins is that it's not that serious. Like, yeah, these characters are going through something emotional and personal in their own lives, but like the relationship, they just sort of meet each other, recognize a chemistry or like a natural, easy to get along kind of thing, and then they just sort of work together to make that happen. And I appreciate forming a poly relationship that way. Also, another thing that's kind of fun about this series specifically is that she's talking about switches, which to me is a very unique concept in the Omegaverse series, where like someone could be an alpha or they could be a beta or they could be an omega, and they meet the right person at the right time and it switches them to a different one of those groups. The exploration there is a lot of fun and is a really original idea to like the Omegaverse world that I think sort of sets the series apart, even if I only find like the relationships a mixed bag sometimes. It certainly rolls me into the next Roxy Collins, which is the Omega Project, book number 5. I was Roxy Collins out by the time I got to this one, and I only really finished it up because there's this one recurring character that's like described as being incredibly creepy and scary, and this is their love story. So I kind of wanted to know what their deal was, what the end game was going to be. There were aspects of it that were fine, and then there were aspects that I just thought so much build up in 4 books to get to this point were kind of like glossed over and brushed off. Exploring switches, like she sort of ran out of steam on that idea. She made it a little too formulaic here at the end, and I think she overbuilt the character Finn and didn't really deliver on him. Also, I think in this specific story, for its length, there is one too many love interests in the Why Choose. And I really think there's one character that we could have disappeared entirely and I wouldn't have even noticed they were gone. Rolling me into Reign of the Morgana by Britnni Chenille. It's a young adult story, so some of my critique here really doesn't apply, but I did find the language and phrasing to be a little stilted and slightly too childish. So depending on like the age range that this young adult was meant for, too childish part might be because this is supposed to be for like 13-year-olds. I really liked the first chapter of this, which I did in that try-chapter video, and then when I came back to it, I reread the first chapter and went forward with the story from there, and I was kind of underwhelmed with what we got. It always really throws me when we get a character like Merlin who's traditionally a man and we make them a woman. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's very jarring and it's hard for me just to start. Using Morgana and Merlin and Arthur and like that whole traditional court is going to be an in name only kind of adaptation, and I would have really loved to see if we had like played more with the history and stuff. This is a very short story that kind of leads into Britnni Chenille's Cold Kingdom series, and I'm actually more more interested in that series than I was before. I kind of do want to read it, see what the writing style is like within that, as well as like what the whole main plot structure is there, and then kind of like circle back to this Reign of Morgana and see how I feel about it after I've read Cold Kingdom. But as a standalone, it's fine, but not doing anything very special. Which rolls me into 4-star reviews. We Live Here Now by Sarah Pinborough. This one is a continuation from last month. It was July's Women in Horrors book that I finally got through this month. Overall, I would say this is a very mixed book. I struggled to get into this for the longest. It's part of why I dragged on it so much. They're doing a couple of different perspectives in the story, and one of the perspectives is going to be a Raven's perspective, and for the life of me, I felt like this was such a stupid, needless kind of thing that I really resented. There's a reason for it, and it makes sense when you get to it, but we open with this Raven's perspective, and we just keep going back to it, and was not personally a very big fan. I learned something about myself while reading this book, and it's that I kind of have to care about the characters for the horror to be effective. Like, otherwise it's like watching a slasher film where all the teens are terrible and have no personality, and I'm just like rooting for terrible things to happen to them, which I guess, to be fair, is a kind of horror. But We Live Here Now is definitely going for like a more creepy, atmospheric, gothic kind of feeling, and where the characters are unlikable to me personally and off-putting. It's very hard for me to get into that mood and like welcome them into the vibe. I got there eventually, where I liked Emily and her husband enough that I was concerned, where I felt like they were human and fallible and going through a rough patch and maybe shouldn't be married, but also just weren't the worst ever. Not to mention, I got to a point where, like, even though I didn't love these characters and think they were just like amazing people, and I was so concerned for them, the mystery of the house and what was going on was enough. Like, there's enough supernatural pull and intrigue there that I wanted to get to the end. I wanted to know what was going on. And as far as like supernatural intrigue goes, the story really delivers. I feel like what's going on in the house is worth reading this, even if you hate the characters and don't care about them. I don't know if horror is the right term for what's happening. I guess it's horrible for the people who are involved, but there's part of me that sort of like shoulder shrugs that there are definitely aspects of horror within this. There are things that you could be horrified by or scared by. I won't spoil it, but you get to the ending and it doesn't necessarily feel horrible for me personally. Overall, I would say this is like a great modern gothic story with a unique perspective and really doing like a fun play on the haunted house trope. And I think it keeps you guessing and trying to figure things out and where it's going to go for a very long time. Which rolls me into The Omega Lesson by Roxy Collins. I really had a fun time with this. I think the relationship building here was really strong. I got a great sense of character. I felt like each of the individual people involved in this Why Choose Omegaverse like had a purpose and meant something. I also think having a female alpha is like a unique fun thing, and then making that female alpha a switch is like extra fun. It's a little bit having your cake and eating it too, because you get to like explore that alpha side and what that means for the female character, but also you get to switch her into Omega view and do the traditional Omega thing too. As far as her portrayal goes, I thought she was a little bit lacking when she was like in alpha mode, and I would have liked a little bit more oomph. But I think it does okay re-imaging that and like explaining what that would mean. There's a lot of things that are very problematic in this book, and I would give content warnings for. The premise here is that she is a teacher at an abusive school, and she's getting into a relationship with a student, which you know I hate. A little bit I was able to overlook it because we never see her in class with him, and because both of them leave the school pretty early into the story, so then like that power dynamic is no longer involved. I will also say that this feels like the book where Roxy Collins is exploring what a Omega path would look like, and she's doing it by implementing some traditional families into the Omega system, and that made me feel super uncomfortable. Like, this pack ends up having 2 blood brothers over here, 3 blood brothers over here, and our female lead in the middle. I was uncomfortable with the way some of the sexuality there was displayed, and conflating being family, aka pack, with being romantically involved or present when intimate things are going on. It was triply concerning for me because the female lead has left another relationship and has a 2-year-old child or a 3-year-old child as well. And they're talking about how that 3-year-old child is also part of their pack. And thankfully they're never involved in anything intimate or witness anything intimate. But because we've got like this brother over here with an age gap situation, and he wants him to be part of the pack and like be his brother or whatever. Also, you might see that as like a guardian and child situation, and they're all present for like romances between them, even if they're not physically interacting. I just like found that concerning and alarming and not a good way to go with it. And if you are looking for a why choose Omegaverse story where there's a pack but not everyone is romantically linked, I actually would go to Catherine Moon's Baby and the Night Howlers book. I don't think there were brothers involved in that or like direct family members, but it is like a large motorcycle pack of alphas with one Omega, and that Omega is only intimate with some of them, but they're still all pack. And what that looks like, what that means is better established in something like that than I think the look we got here, which the way things played out in the writing angle at several times made me very nervous. Obviously it's sitting here at 4 stars instead of 3 stars. The strength of the relationships alone kind of like pushed it over for me, but I refuse to put something in a 4-star category without like acknowledging what was not working and why, which rolls us into The Omega Game by Roxy Collins. This is another one in the Billionaires in Heat series. In this case, our main love interest is a beta boxer, which like it was kind of fun to have a female boxer in a professional boxing sphere. Of all the books, this is sort of playing off the sports romance trope. There's like some famous rugby players involved too. And I don't love the sports aspect of it, but I do think it added something to have like the boxing elements for a woman specifically, because that interests me, even if generally that sort of thing does not. There's another situation where I thought each of the guys were pretty unique. I thought their individual relationships and seeing them come together worked well, which is why it's here at 4 stars. There were some problematic moments in this one too. Specifically in book 2, we meet a Omega who is asexual, and that Omega is featured in this story and becomes sexual when they meet the right person, which personally I think is damaging, because I'm sure people who are asexual say that they don't have any sort of like sexual attraction to people here all the time. That will change when they find the right person. I really loved seeing this person represented in book 2, like an Omega who doesn't experience sexual interest. It almost like defeats the whole point of being an Omega, because like that's all about like embracing your sexuality, being a very sexual, nature-driven kind of creature with a lot of drive and instinct. I would have loved some kind of relationship here for that ace person, like a place for them in a pack, even if they're not necessarily having that high sex drive that we associate with Omegas and Omega style stories. I don't know exactly how you would have implemented that well. I really want to partner with a couple of asexual people and like spitball a couple things, but I can see a couple of scenarios play out where that would be a lot of fun, and I would want to talk to someone and make sure the representation is good there, but just sort of like they flipped a switch, and for the right person at the right time they're very sexual. Not a big fan of that. Overall, I kept it at 4 stars because even though that's disappointing, I think how all of these characters come together, I think their individuality, their slow chemistry building, all of that works really well. I like the relationships a lot here, and I just do think it's a fun, pretty short read. Rolling me into In Every Generation by Kendare Blake. This is first in a young adult series that's like the next generation taking over the Buffy the Vampire Slayer mantle. So it's got like some legacy characters from the Buffy the Vampire TV show. It was sort of fun to dive back into them. It takes like that quirky, fun, bantery kind of style that we got in like the original Joss Whedon TV show and puts it in like a Gen Alpha, Gen Z kind of language scenario, which was interesting. It's very interesting to take that formula and pattern and put it into like what the kids today would associate with. And it did leave me wondering, like, I wonder what the youth thinks about this story. You know, because I'm a millennial, I'm looking at it as a millennial, a nostalgic thing, and seeing it like transform for the next generation or like reimagined to suit the next generation. And I wonder if it's doing that effectively. And if it is, then there's all sorts of interesting things that we could say about pretty much the whole project. But without that input, I don't want to speculate too heavily. Halloween. Now, I picked this story up specifically because I was doing the Never Marathon and I was in Team Cask of Amatillado, and this was their group book. I would not have ever read this book if not for that. And it's because like young adult is not really my thing. And on top of that, I couldn't figure out if this Buffy the Vampire Slayer was giving any kickbacks to Joss Whedon. And this is a Disney book, and I do feel some kind of way about just like massively consuming a lot of Disney stuff. Even though like at this point in time, it's sort of hard not to. And for all those reasons, this is a trilogy, and I don't know if I would continue the trilogy. But like as a one-off read, it was fun. I had a good time. I have some qualms about how the legacy characters were portrayed, but I understand why they did it that way so that we could really let some of the younger characters like shine and get their own identity. It's not really about those legacy characters. The title is in every generation for a reason, and that reason is we're moving on past them. Part of me would have really liked a reboot instead of a continuation because I just think those legacy characters need to get the hell out of the way, live in their own universe, and we needed to do the Slayer concept fresh without them, and that way we wouldn't have had like all these established characters, established things we expect from them, power sets, that kind of whole 9 yards of whatever that we have to like squish in, as well as like figuring out what the original formula was, making it work in a book versus TV show, and modernizing like where kids are today. Just like asking the book to do a lot, and I don't think it executed perfectly on everything. Which rolls me into Carmilla by J. Sheridan LaFauna. This is a classic gothic novella about sapphic vampires, and I read it as part of my Nevermore Notes book club. This was our August read, and overall I thought it was very pretty. Like the prose were nice, the storytelling, the description, it was all working really well together. I think it's like about 100 pages, and if you're listening to it on audio, it's 2.5 to 3 hours. So you can definitely get through it all in one sitting, and that's more or less what I did to read it. I think that worked best because I did struggle a little bit with the language in this story specifically. I don't know if it was my focus or if it was that this was just a difficult read. There were several areas where I was rereading the same thing or like tandem reading both visually and listening at the same time so I could like pay enough attention. I really had a hard time like zoning in and focusing. Like I was listening to this audiobook and realizing that I had no idea what I had just listened to and had to like rewind the tape more or less so that I could figure out what was going on. Once I finally fell into a pattern with this though, it was really beautiful. It was a lot of fun. Then something personally for me that was interesting is earlier this year I read Hungerstone, which is a Carmilla retelling. People who had originally read Carmilla in that book club said they didn't see a lot of the original Carmilla in Hungerstone, and I would agree to disagree on that one. There's definitely a very strong version of Carmilla. In the original Carmilla, she's quite contradictory, being like really warm and friendly and lovely and feminine in one side, and then being just an awful brat at other times and like really angry and sort of scary. I think like that awful, angry, scary, contradictory kind of one is who we get in most of Hungerstone, and we're sort of like exploring why she's that way, maybe why Lenore should be that way too. This one, because our character is younger, because she has a good relationship with her father and like some other people, I feel like that is part of what prevents her from falling under Carmilla's spell. That and like a bit of luck. Not to mention in this original story it's a horror, so like Carmilla's spell is specifically called out as being awful and leading to death, where like in Hungerstone falling under Carmilla's spell would lead Lenore to freedom. This original was a lot of fun. It's really worth a modern reader's time, even though it's a little hard to get into. I'm going to be doing a longer standalone Gothic review and picking it apart in detail, but I do think I'd be remiss not to mention this one content warning. There is like some weird and unnecessary racism in this book, and I know people are probably like, well, no, duh, this is a super old book. From what I remember, literally one line about a black woman riding in the carriage and being like ugly and bug-eyed and evil and wishing harm on people. And I was kind of thrown out of the story when she was described and when they were just like hating on her for no reason because nobody had interacted with this person. Also, like where they were, I didn't necessarily expect there to be a bunch of black people or for us to have that kind of racist overlap, even though I know time period wise, if black people were involved, there'd be racism. So that sort of like threw me out. And then I was like, okay, well there's gotta be a point to this. Like surely you would not just have one racist line that's awful and jarring and then never bring it up again. I guess you would. actually, though. I have no idea why LaFonu wrote this. I don't know if it was meant to be some kind of red herring, like we're supposed to be like, oh, she's a witch or something. I don't know what this means or why it's there. It hit me like a train, and not in a good way. There's of course also generalized racism about like the British culture being the superior culture and whatever, all that kind of stuff, but like you expect that. I'm not necessarily calling that out. Slightly less content warning, but still worth mentioning, is like this book is really harsh on ugly, tired people. But at least in this case, I could say that like there's an okay reason for being so harsh on ugly, tired people. Like, for starters, calling it out is one of the ways that we realize Melarca and Carmilla are the same person, because it's the same manservant. Also, this manservant is enabling vampires to like travel across the country and eat people, so they are being evil and nefarious, you know? And it makes sense that they would be like tired and pale and stuff, because maybe the vampires are feeding on them and they have to keep like an unhealthy nighttime schedule that would like wear you down. And then I guess third and final content warning might be some homophobia. I didn't personally read it that way because vampires and sexuality is always portrayed as alluring, something that's highly attractive, that like gets people into it and into the mood, and then they're like repulsed and feel awful. So I just see this as sexual repression, period. Like if you look at Dracula, there's significant attraction to Dracula's bride in a heteronormative way between our main male character and his interaction there, where he's both attracted and repulsed by them at the same time. And he's like being unfaithful to his wife in his attraction, and that repulsion is like the natural awareness of evil that's there. Or like if you look at Dracula himself and how he's feeding on young women, they're both attracted to him and repulsed by him. Both Lucy, I think her name is, the one who dies, and also Mina, when she like falls under Dracula's thrall. Like there's something about it that's pleasurable and drawing her in, but she's also like super ashamed and horrified and repulsed at the same time. So we see that same interaction going on here between our main female protagonist and Carmilla, and in that way I thought the whole thing was more about sexual repression in general than like homophobia. And in some ways I thought it was actually sort of normalizing a lesbian relationship, because heteronormative vampire-human relationships are like this, so homosexual ones are like that as well. But I could 100% see why someone wouldn't enjoy seeing like that deeply attracted, lovey-dovey, very cutesy kind of stuff, and then like this repulsion, aggression sort of cycle back and forth like that. Like I could see where that would be triggering, even if it's portrayed the same in heterosexual relationships between vampires and humans too. There were a couple dangling plot threads at the end of this I would have liked a little bit more closure on, but at the same time I'm kind of happy it's left open-ended like that, because it gives me a couple more things to chew on and think about. Overall, I think this is a really pretty work. This is probably the first time I've read something older and gothic in a while and really loved it. Would definitely read it even if it wasn't a classic. Rolling me into 5-star reviews. Letter Slot by Owen King. This is the last of the Shivers collection I needed to read, and there is a much longer standalone review coming out in September. But I loved this. It was fantastic, and I'm actually interested in reading more Owen King just based off of this. I will say I think this might get like a mixed reception from an audience. If you are character driven and looking for a deep, interesting character arc, then this is for you. And if you're like more plot driven, I think there's actually a couple plot holes in this and complicating factors that make this kind of like off-putting. I could feel that in my immediate response to the story, because I got to the end of it and I loved it and was so blown away. And then I took half a breath and I was like, actually I have problems with these parts. And that's because I'm character driven first and plot driven second. The way this made great character building, satisfying narrative arc, it actually leaves open a couple holes when it comes to like the overall plot and world building. And I think they could have done both, but to like strengthen the character part actually put holes in the plot and the world building in this particular case. Next is going to be The Pram by Joe Hill. This is part of the Creature Feature collection, and there's definitely a much longer review slated in that video. I felt like this was a really great exploration of like the man's perspective when there's a miscarriage, how they try to cope and deal with it. And on top of that, I think the horror, the supernatural, the gore, it was all giving and like building on each other and amplifying each component. But I definitely think that this is one that you should pick up and you should go in as blind as possible to. It Waits in the Woods by Josh Malerman. This is also part of the creature feature and has its own standalone coming out later this month. The short version here is I think all the details are on point in building in this story. I love the sister relationship. I love that this sister lost a sister years ago and they never found out what happened to her, and she is going to discover it on her own one way or the other. I think the added elements here where they were both artistically inclined and talented. The one that we're following was like the director and the other one starred in all her films. That's like a great little addition. It gives us that artsy craftsmanship element, and it also like weaves in this knowledge about like recording equipment, video cameras, all that kind of stuff that has relevance in the story, but also just adds this extra grounded, realistic flavor that I really enjoy. Plus, this is probably like a personal thing, but I really like artistry when it's on display and like an interest in artistry, and I don't care if it's filming, if it's acting, if it's writing, if it's painting, if it's tattooing. I mean, it could be house design or whatever. Like, giving me those details about what it takes to be into that, what it means to be passionate about something, like really diving in like that, I really love that. It adds a lot to a story for me. That this has like a really classic urban legend kind of aspect to it and gives it like a little bit of a Blair Witch feel, I think all just adds to the story, builds and makes it more fun. Next is War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I reread this after watching the 2025 War of the Worlds, which probably has a review coming out. Wrote a script for it. I don't know if it's relevant enough for me to film, to be honest with you guys. The book's excellent and it's pretty short. I highly recommend reading it or listening to an audio rendition of it. This is a book that has never been out of print. That's how popular and seminal it is to like the alien invasion kind of story. If your only introduction to War of the Worlds was the 2025 movie, do not worry. It is like an in-name only adaptation, and you're gonna find this story is just like beautiful and awesome. Historically, I find the upbeat ending in War of the Worlds a little bit corny, but in this return to it, I just found it more inspiring and like hopeful than anything else. Next is going to be The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Obviously, this is a reread. I really only did this for the Nevermore Note-a-thon because I wanted a bingo on my card. And The Raven is a poem, so it's short and easy. I like it. Every time I read Edgar Allan Poe's poetry, it reminds me that I really enjoy poetry, specifically like more lyric, romantic poetry, and it makes me kind of want to get back into it. But I gotta tell you, as far as commentary goes, I'm not the right person for that. And then last is going to be My Darling Dreadful Thing by Johanna Van Veen. I loved this so much. It's going to have its own standalone gothic review that I've already filmed, and I don't know when I'm going to schedule it, but it's coming. As far as like a modern gothic work, if you're into like ghosts, hauntings, seances, creepy old houses, this is giving you all of that at like a very high level. And part of what I really love about this story is there's definitely an aspect of timelessness in it. The way it's written, the way people are talking and interacting, it could be a Victorian era setting, it could be a modern setting with just a few like little tweaks, and here in like the 1950s, 1940s makes sense too. This very well could be my favorite read of the year. There's a lot about it that is very similar to Camilla Bruce's You Let Me In. For starters, our main character is unreliable, and there is a psychologist evaluating whether or not they're delusional about this ghost thing or if the ghost thing is real, and they're involved in several brutal murders, and they're trying to figure out if they're sane enough to stand trial and how involved they were in those deaths, which is all part of what's going on in Camilla Bruce's You Let Me In too. The difference between like a creepy fae creature that lives in a mound in a hill like you'd see in Camilla Bruce's story, and like a ghost that's been perfectly preserved because they're in a bog or someplace else like that, and you end up claiming them and becoming like a yoke mate to them, is limited. Like, I would say that the similarities there are startling and part of what makes the horror in both. And like that aspect of naturalism, the body horror that you can see because these are spirits that are physically decayed or like totally non-human creatures in the fairy. It's giving all of that at a very high caliber and it's fun, and I think the fact that these things are so grotesque looking and our main character loves them, is drawn to them, and even finds them delightful. Part of the horror, because it's telling that something so off-putting is comfort to them. It's been on my TBR for a while. It was the Nevermore-a-thon's book group of the month, so that's part of why I read it specifically now. But I'm so glad I finally got to it. It was so much fun. I won't get into it too far because I do have that standalone review coming out. I think if I had one complaint, it's that this is a sapphic story where I think we didn't get enough sapphic. Like, there was lots of longing, but it took us a really long time to get to like the fruition, and I think I just would have liked a little bit more like lovey-dovey time. Although I know this is a horror, I know it's gothic, like that's not what it was trying to do. I just would have liked a little more of it. All of that rolls me into what my September reading plans are going to be. I need to finish Lestat the Vampire. I need to script that. I need to film it because I plan to put those out in October. Tentatively, I am planning to separate each one of the 7 parts into a different video, although part 1 is short enough that maybe part 1 and 2 will be combined. We'll just see. I've only started reading part 2 so far. It's a lot of work for me to actually get all of that up and running. Fingers are crossed that that's actually going to happen for you guys. I'm really going to try my best this month. I need to read The Bewitching by Sylvia Moreo Garcia. It was my goal to read it with the Women in Horror Book Club this month, and I did not get to that. I read a lot of books this August. That just didn't happen to be one of them. I also want to get back on track with the Women in Horror Book Club, so I do also want to read their new book, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's the same author, I think, who wrote La Hacienda, and that's been on my TBR for a while, so it'll be great to get something from that author. The Weirdo Book Club is doing a John Marrs book that's on Kindle Unlimited and also has the Audible available that way, so I'll have no excuse not to read it. I've read John Marrs once before and thought it was like okay, but I am interested in giving it a second chance. And then last but not least, I am 20% through Twisted Crowns, which is the close of the Dark Window duology. I really would like to finish that this year just so I can give you guys like a take on whether or not I liked the duology. Book 1 left me in a place where I was happy with what I had read, even though there were frustrating elements. So far, book 2 is interesting, but I don't know if I find it frustrating or not yet. There are a couple parts that feel like warning signals that I might not be down for this duology, but I don't want to be too preemptive. I really want to finish the whole thing so I have a take, and so that I can figure out if I want to read this new one that she released this year. Last but not least, I do want to participate in the Unstuffathon this month. I don't remember the prompt off the top of my head, but I would like to keep reading books I already own. I keep picking up these free ebooks, and if I'm not reading them, it's kind of like, what am I doing with my life? And I'm keeping up with the Nevermore Notes book club that I started. As I am filming, what we're going to read is still open to vote, but I will announce whatever one of those 3 books we pick out. But those are my September plans. I'm keeping it a little bit more open this month because I know October I'm going to have the Love in the Night Paranormal Readathon, and then of course that's always a time I read a lot of horror books, so I just want to like get a little bit of a relaxation moment before I go into a more intense reading moment. But talk to me in those comments down below. What are your September reading plans? If you got this far, leave me a skull emoji in those comments down below, and as always, keep reading.